Representatives from the federal and regional Belgian governments met on Friday to discuss possible further measures to try to slow down the spread of coronavirus. Several sources say a curfew from 2300 hours to 600 hours was on the agenda. The rules on social bubbles and the guidance on remote working were also set to be discussed. Reporter Lucy Hough, SABC correspondent in Brussels, joins us now. Lucy, so first of all, did that meeting take place and what was the outcome?
It certainly did. It ran to nearly 6 hours, and we've just had the press conference from the new Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, announcing some really tough measures indeed. A curfew has been approved that will kick in from tonight, running from midnight till 5 o'clock in the morning. We've also got the nationwide closure of bars, cafes and restaurants. We already had some restrictions to hospitality here in Brussels, which is by far the worst affected region of Belgium, but that's not something that's been rolled out nationwide, and in an extension of what was in place here, restaurants have now been shut completely for a 4-week period. There's also been a reduction in the social bubble. That is the amount of people that you can see outside of your household with close social contact. That's gone down from 3 to just 1. We've also had an order for mandatory teleworking where possible. So some really strict new measures in place, but the numbers here in Belgium have been very worrying. This stops short of a complete lockdown, and the message from the government has been clear today that this isn't a lockdown, but we are not far now from where we were during those peak lockdown months in March and April.
Okay, so let's talk about the numbers there today.
Well, the numbers, as I say, have been really worrying. We have seen the figures go up by almost 100% to just under 6,000 daily cases per day. The number of people being admitted to intensive care wards in hospital for COVID-19 is doubling every 11 days. We're now at nearly 200 admissions per day. We've been warned by health officials that if the current rate of hospital admission continues, all ICU wards around the country will be full by mid-November. That's some 2,000 specialist beds in Belgian hospitals that are due to be at maximum capacity unless something drastic is done. So clearly these steps that have been introduced today are about curbing that increase to try and get a hold of the crisis before we see the total saturation of the healthcare system here in Belgium.
And I want to talk about beyond some of the measures that you mentioned. There were reports suggesting that French-speaking schools in Brussels and Wallonia have extended their half-term holiday by an extra 3 days. Is there an expectation that schools are going to shut down as they tighten measures?
The hope is that schools can remain open, but what we will see is new measures being brought in. There was a sort of contingency plan put in place as schools reopened at the start of this school year in September, with a colour-coded system, green being life basically as normal pre-pandemic, red being the most critical stage, and it does appear that we are now in red. So that means restrictions, particularly for older pupils, on class sizes. There will be alternate days for many students, and some students will be forced to work from home for some parts of the week. The number of students attending school in person will be cut drastically. There will also be changes to the rules on face masks as well. So, but really, that is the key difference, I think, from where we were in the spring when the lockdown measures were first introduced, is that keeping schools open, keeping the education system running as far as is possible is a top priority for the government.
Okay, so Lucy, now I'm just looking at the figures here. France is still at number 10 in terms of countries with most infections. What about the rest of Europe?
Yeah, France, I mean, we've had a record number of cases there, 30,000 cases reported in just 24 hours. And those measures that were introduced by French President Emmanuel Macron on Wednesday during another presidential address, although a very different sort of style of address from him. He was being interviewed by 2 female journalists and announcing an unprecedented curfew that hasn't been seen in France in peacetime. A strict curfew, stricter than some people were expecting, running between 9 p.m. and 6 o'clock in the morning that closes down all businesses in those hours, with people asked to stay at home. And if you're caught on the streets, you need to have a piece of paper to explain why you're outside of your house in those hours. And if you're not found to have a good reason, there's a fine there of €135. So those are measures that are in place in 9 cities in around France, but much of France now being classified as a red zone. Similarly, the case numbers in Spain are increasing all of the time. In Madrid, we know that nearly 4.5 million people are living under strict lockdown conditions there, as the regional authorities tried to prevent that from happening, but a state of emergency was declared there, and again there is a strict partial lockdown in place there. So across much of Europe now we are seeing some very strict measures being put in place as the case numbers continue to rise and as crucially the hospitalizations continue to increase.
Lucy, thank you very much, and of course we will be speaking to our colleague Stuart in the UK later on. Lucy Hough, SABC correspondent in Brussels, and we'll get the details on Prime Minister Boris Johnson's address in the UK in just a moment. First, there's two